Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's video lecture on creating evocative perspectives using the photo montage technique. So today we look at creating a perspective just like this one, and we ask ourselves the question, how do we get from here, our one-point perspective that we created in AutoCAD, to a drawing like this? So the idea of the evocative perspective and the idea of the photo montage technique is not to represent things in a photorealistic render. That's not what we're trying to do. In fact, it's kind of the opposite. What we're trying to do is to represent the experience by creating an interpretation of what it might be like to be there. So rather than creating a photorealistic experience of every single detail of the building and the structure and how it all works and goes together and what it would look like on site, instead we're trying to capture the emotion and the atmosphere of what it would be like to be there. And this is a technique used widely across architecture schools, by graphic designers, by a lot of different people. So we tend to have the two schools of thought. We have both the photorealistic renderers and we have the photo montage renders. I personally prefer the photo montage because, after all, the photo render is never going to capture, no matter how good it looks, it's never going to capture the realities of the space. And so you're always going to upset people, clients, yourself, that it doesn't quite look the same once it's built on site. So to me, it seems better to create an essence of the experience that we're trying to move towards and shift towards for the client, and then we can talk about what we're trying to achieve that way. And it becomes more about the architecture, the experience, rather than about specific details. So, how do we get from here to here? Well, let's first look at the photo montage technique and some examples. So in your unit materials, if you go into methods, unit materials, and then post-digital, post-photo montage examples, will bring you up to this Pinterest page. Now remember, say what you want about Pinterest, but it's a good place to find lots of examples curated by others for you. So in here we look at many different photo montage examples. You can see that some look a little more realistic than others. Others are more towards the collage and art techniques, which is what we'll be looking at today. But the principles remain the same and the techniques remain the same in Photoshop. It just depends how you tweak the final product to look a certain way. So my preferred styles are ones like this one here, and this one here, and this one here, but really it is dependent on the experience and atmosphere of the project that you're trying to capture. So think back to your research of your case study, think back to the house itself, and ask yourself, what really were the architects trying to achieve in terms of the experience? And then find a style here, or your own, that works for you and to help you capture that. So for me, I like these styles, but I want to talk to you about where they come from, this photo montage technique. So they all have a connection back to art and the actual collage technique. So examples like this one here of David Hockney, and you'll see a lot of this in the image that I've created of the Studio Bright Ruckers Hill house. It's the Californian modernist piece. And you can tell your eye is kind of darting around. It's not real, but at the same time there is this feeling or a sensation about warmth and summer and Saturdays and holidays, and all these kind of things come rushing to the foreground when looking at the image. Even though it's not real, we can tell that it's not real in our eye. We go back further to artists like De Chirico, and we look at perspectives like this and like this, and we can tell that, again, it's not real. The sky is not green like this, but we have an impression of what it is like to stand there and to witness this space and the experience. Again, probably my personal favorite, Edward Hopper. You would all be familiar with this artwork, but my personal favorite is this one, Morning Sun, because while again it's not photoreal, we have this amazing sense of what it's like. It's so relatable, that experience of sitting there and having the morning sunrise come into the bedroom and experience that place. So that's really what we're trying to capture in the photo montage technique. It's about experience, not about creating photorealistic imagery. So think about that as you're layering in Photoshop. What is the experience that you're trying to create as you shift and adapt your Photoshop? Okay, so let's first go through all the layers that I've got here. Now normally I would clean these up a little bit more. For example, these white brick textures I would join into one rather than having them individual layers, but I wanted to keep all the layers separate so that you can see all of the work that goes into building an image like this. It's not difficult work, it's the same techniques that we talked about last week with the selection tools and the brush tools, and a few others that we'll talk about today. But it's about slowly layering up the space to create the image. So if I turn all these off quickly, you'll start to see all of these different layers add together, whether they be material or vegetation or color, texture, light, shadow. You'll also see that we play a little bit less with the soft and ambient light and shadow in these kinds of drawings because it's more about that essence of experience than creating a photoreal image. And continue taking these off and you can see more and more all of these textures coming away from the original perspective. All of these are just cut out using the selection tool, using the magnetic selection tool, the lasso, and they all come together. We've got our sky in there, and there it is. Go back to our original perspective, that one there. You can see it. That's where it came from. Okay, so before I start, I usually go and find some textures and things that I know I'm going to need in the image, and of course you can do this while you're going, but I'll have things like some bricks, I know this is going to be good, some concrete, the timber for the back, some grass for the foreground. I've got some gum leaves that I can just paint in because this is in Australia. I've got some foliage that's already been cut out and laid in a PNG for me. But if you have the same thing and it's not cut out, you can just erase around it using the mask tool like we talked about in the last video. Same thing for this tree. And then we've got some people that we can cut out and add into the space. Golden retriever, of course, and a lady standing there. So we've come from this one perspective, we've layered all those things together, and ultimately that gets us to this drawing that we have here. So let's start doing that step by step. First thing we want to do is from our AutoCAD file, we want to export to PDF with our line weights on the thinnest possible line. So right now I've got these at 0.05, and you'll see why in just a second. So if we create a new file, we want to have it the same file or paper size as what we were working on in our original perspective, just to make sure the line weights are going to be nice and crisp. Remember, Photoshop doesn't handle line weights, it turns it into pixels, so we want to try and make it as easy as possible for Photoshop so that we don't get any blurring. So 420, 297 and 300 pixels per inch. I'm on RGB, my background is white and 8-bit. Make sure that was on millimeters before you put any numbers there. So I create that page, I add in my PDF from AutoCAD, remember thinnest line weights. Oops, sorry, let's do that again. So I missed a crucial step there. Remember, we always want to go to media box. So it tells it that A3 is going to A3. There we go. Now I can see it's gone all the way to the edges. My line weights look good. So double click inside there, and we've got our line weights. Now, the reason why we want our line weights so thin, the thinnest possible, is because we're going to be adding our textures all the way to these lines in and around this perspective. Now if we have thick lines, what will happen is when you turn this drawing off later, you'll end up with lots of heavy white gaps between all of your textures, and then you'll have to go and edit all of your textures all over again. So you really want to, from the start, make sure you're doing that correct. Make sure you're adding your perspective in with the thinnest line weights possible. Alright, So very first step, I'm going to start adding some bricks to this wall here, and then to this back wall as well. And we'll go through a few techniques in how to do this. So this is my brick texture, and as you can see, it's probably at the right scale here, but if we wanted to use this brick for all of this wall over here, our bricks are going to get crazy out of scale. I'll show you what I mean by that. So Command T, right click on it and distort. If I grab this, put this one down to here, this one down to here for our perspective, you'll see that these ones are really distorted and thin, and these ones down this end are way too big for this space. So it's not quite right. We know we need to add a bit more texture to this one. So what we can do, when we have what's called a tiled texture, which most of them these days are on textures.com, or if you're Googling white brick texture, you've got that. We can just copy by holding down Alt and dragging across your shape, and it will create a seamless texture like this one here. So now I should be able to merge these together and then use that same technique. So let's grab all of those ones over in our Layers tab, right click, merge layers. Now if I line this up with that edge over here, Control T, going to right click, distort, hold Shift as you bring that one down, zoom into that edge. Just got to make sure I get it nice and tight to where these lines are in there. You want to do this right the first time so we don't have too much adjusting to do later. Make sure everything's straight. Okay, so that's got that edge. Now I need to do this other edge over here. So what I can do is I can pull this one down to here, see where it lines up at that bottom. Pull this one up over here, and we have our brick wall. There you go. So double click inside there to finish, and we see we now have our brick wall. These ones are not anywhere near as warped as they were last time, and these ones down this end are an appropriate scale relative to that column down there. So you can see how tripling the texture has allowed us to make this far less warped. Then we turn our opacity down so we can cut out the elements that don't have any brick to it. So I'm just going to very quickly do this one. You would take your time a lot more. Hold down Shift to get a straight line. Again, I'm just going to do this quick as possible. Take your time when you do it, otherwise things don't line up nicely. Over the top there, and delete that. And we would do the same thing for all three. Now what you'll notice is, and this is quite common in pretty much every texture you're going to bring in, is that it doesn't quite have the tone or the color that you're looking for out of this image. So there's another technique we're going to use, which is laying a color transparency over the top of this thing. So you would have noticed in our image we've got more of a cream color tone coming over our brickwork. So we want to do that again. So what I can do is, once this is all cut out and it's cut over those other two arches and looking good and we're happy with it, what I can do is I can create a new layer over the top, then go back to where the texture was for my bricks, right click inside that box and go select pixels. It's going to select everything that's inside that shape. I go back over to my layer 1 and bring up G for our paint bucket. I'm going to paint in over the top of that, and that gives me this color over the top. Press Command D, Control D to deselect, and then I can now turn the opacity down to 70%, something like that. Now that's probably too orange for me in that type, so what I want to do is, with that layer selected, layer 1, hit Control U or Command U. That's going to bring up this hue saturation tool, which is one of the most important tools for today's video. because it gives you the option to change not only the saturation of the color, so if we play with this one here, we can make it more intense orange, but probably more importantly is the hue. So we can experiment using the photo montage technique of what does this image look like if we were to very quickly test a few different options of the colors. So for example, if you wanted to change the color of the sky from the blue that you have, and you want to change from an aqua or a pink or a very, very dark lilac to represent nighttime, you can do that very, very quickly here with the hue and saturation palette. I'm pretty happy with the hue at the moment, but I do want to make it a little bit lighter because it's not quite so orange. So I can bump that up to about 65, and that looks more representative of what we have at the moment. So again, that's just Control U. That gives you a lot of option to play around with that. If you've done too much to it, it does, for example, if I wanted to go back to that orangey color, you see I can't just go darker now. So we have Control Z, but if we've gone too far into it, remember all we would need to do is right click on the brick texture, select pixels, use our G paint bucket, and we can paint it back in again. So don't stress too much if you've accidentally gone too far with your Command U hue, saturation or darkness. You can always just paint it back in again later. So let's once again have a look at another texture and another technique. I've got a curve up here that I need to put some bricks onto. So let's get started by first bringing in our bricks once again. Now we know that these bricks are not going to be an appropriate scale. They're going to be even smaller than the ones we were using back here. So let's put it over there to roughly where it's going to be. Get it to scale as close as you can by eye. Okay, that looks about appropriate from this one to this one. Do the best as you can. Now, next thing we want to do is, of course, we need to make some copies of this, which we have here. That looks pretty good. Then we go over to our Layers tab, select them all, merge layers. Now we're going to hit Command T again, but instead of going with Distort, this time we're going to look at the Warp technique. So Warp comes up with this grid of 9. And what it does is it allows us to move things around on a curve, as you can see here. So depending where I push and pull, I'm able to generate a curve in the perspective here, which gives us a lot of power in our perspective creation. So I'm able to manipulate this and push and pull it, mold it, until I have the sensation that this thing is actually turning around a corner. So you can see I can grab this and do as much as we want to it. It does take quite a while to get it working the way you want to, so much like all of these things in Photoshop, there's lots of fiddling around and getting things quite perfect. But you can see the technique here. I would just continue pushing and pulling this until we're happy with it and everything is lining up nicely. You want to make sure that most of your lines, particularly in this area where it goes straight again, go back to being straight. So you have to kind of push it and pull it and make sure everything's doing what it needs to do. When you're happy with it, obviously I would massage this a bit more, but when I am happy with it, right click and go back to Free Transform, and then double click inside there, and that'll finish off the shape for you. Then we use the same technique of deleting out the bits that we don't want. This, obviously I'm just doing this very roughly and quickly, you do it a bit better, and that's how we have that wall shape there. Same technique again, select pixels, make a new layer over the top. G is our paint bucket, but remember that orange was too orange. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn up layer 1 to 100% because that is the color that we do want. Go back over to our select pixels, there we go. G for paint bucket, hold down Alt to get the eyedropper tool, and now you'll see it's gone to the underside of here, so I press X to swap that one over, and then I can click inside there, so on our new layer, which is that one there, and we've got that there. So now hold down Shift on layer 1 and layer 2 and bring those both down to 70, and now we know that they match perfectly because after all they are the same color brick. So that's just a matter of bringing up the opacity so that they can be copied. If you were to copy it at this color, it would not work properly because it's not copying the full color, it's copying a percentage of the color. So you always need to bring the opacity back up to 100 before you can use the eyedropper tool on any colors. Alright, let's do another one. Now I'm going to bring in this timber, and I want to show you this timber ceiling, rainbow wheel, if we just wait a second. So what we want to do is we want to manipulate some timber using the distort tool to create a timber ceiling. So let's do that and scale it down first, get it roughly to the dimension we want. Okay, that's way too big, as you can see here. Okay, that's still too big, so we go in there, and that's about right at that scale. So we follow the same technique again, hold down Alt, but what we can see here is it's getting a little bit too obvious that this is a copy. This one isn't tiled perfectly because we've got a light side and a dark side. So what we can do is some mirroring. So let's Control click on this one, so it takes it to that layer. Control T, and then we go right click, flip horizontal. And what you'll see is it's now matched up the dark edge with the dark edge, and it looks a little bit more seamless. I'm going to do the same thing for this one over here. Control click, Control T, right click, flip horizontal. And now I've got light to dark, dark, light to light to dark. Okay, so it looks a little bit more seamless, a little bit less like a copy. Then the next thing we want to do is this thing's going to have quite a bit of depth to it, so one layer isn't going to be enough. So first thing, we're going to merge this one, merge layers. Then we're going to do the same thing as before, Alt and bring it down. And again, that doesn't look quite so seamless, so we need to do the same thing but in the opposite direction. So right click, through, and this time we're going to go flip vertical. And there we have it. So we do have a bit of a seam here, but to the eye, and especially after it gets distorted later, it looks a lot better than these jagged copies and repeats. So you want to make sure that before you start doing your warping and your transforming, get everything looking good on your texture, and then it will look much better in the final perspective version. Alright, so now I'm ready to do my warp after I merge these together, so that's just one piece. I'm going to turn the opacity down on this texture so that I can see where I'm doing my warping. Alright, I'm just going to scale this one a little bit there, make sure I'm happy with where it's sitting at the top, which is just this line up there. Then I'm going to distort. I'm going to bring this one back to this edge here, and this one back to this edge here. So we're going to have to play around a little bit to get them working. So we want this edge along here to be straight, and we want to line up with this vanishing point line going out here as well. So you just kind of have to massage it a little bit until you get both elements lining up. This has got a bit of a bow here, so what we're going to have to do is just pull it a little bit further, and then we can trim that stuff out later. You just want to make sure all of your lines are covered up where the ceiling is going to be. That looks pretty good. We double click inside there to finish. Now you can see if we put our opacity up, all of these lines of our timber are now lining up with our vanishing point. So remember, from our 1 point perspective, our vanishing point was just inside here, and we can see all of these elements of our timber are all lining up to that as well. So now our vanishing point is still working with our textures. This brick is lining up with there, and our timber is lining up with there as well. Alright, so now we do the same thing as before. We cut out. Again, you'll do this a lot faster, a lot slower. Put down your shift to get your straight edges. That looks good along there. No. So remember, we use the delete key or the backspace key just to go back one step. And the trick is to zoom in as close as you can to these elements to just really make sure you get it as tight as possible. If you're not tight when you're doing your selection, you'll find that later on you're going to have a lot of gaps between all your individual elements. Alright, that looks pretty good. But again, we can see this is way too intense a color for what's going on inside there. So, same technique. Created a new layer, select pixels of the timber, go back up to the new layer, G for paint bucket, swap that back to that orange that I liked before, and then I've got that over the top. Bring that layer down, maybe to a 70%, and now I have a nice warm orangey timber inside here, which looks great. And then we follow this process over and over again. We continue to bring the textures back in and play with them, and we experiment with colors over the top. Now, I want to have a look at sky. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the original image now and talk about some of the other elements we've got. So I'll just get rid of that one, open it back up again. Here we are. So we can see we've got quite a few elements going on here. We've got that orange timber, we've got this threshold that's over there, we've got some depth to the windows. Remember, windows, when you're looking from outside in, always look dark rather than light. You can play around with trying to create a bit of a mirror, so you might brush some pink over the top of this black to get some of the pink sky over the pink window, all sorts of things. But you'll notice that I don't have a lot of soft shadows around in this particular image. I've even gone ahead and turned this shadow off in this image. And that's more so because of the original techniques that I like, the Edward Hopper technique. It's not so much about the shadow, but rather about texturing these different colors together. But let's talk about what different colors do. So if, for example, we're looking at the grass, this is the original grass that we've brought in, but it's way too green for this image. And you'll start to see this as you develop up your image. Things just won't work when we're creating an image. So if I change my sky to more of a bright blue color, remember Control U, Command U. If I was to change this to more of your traditional sky blue, it starts to look a bit fake and a bit weird. So it's counterintuitive, but by having an odd pink sky and by putting in some texture over the top of our grass, where's our grass gone? Here we are. It actually makes it feel less awkward to the eye as we work. So the point is, never bring anything into Photoshop with just its individual layer. So you'll see that grass has two layers, one layer there and another layer there. These brick walls that we have here have both the wall texture, which is underneath there, and the color over the top. This tree, if I click on this one here, has both the original tree and a color that we've put over the top. And it's that same technique of using right-click, select pixels, and using the paint bucket or a brush tool over the top. And the reason we do this is because if I turn this off, a real tree does not suit this image. This one here as well, if I turn this one off, it doesn't look right, does it? Even if I turn this dog off that I've got here, the golden retriever, and I turn these little girls off, right? Everything looks a bit odd, as you can see. So again, counterintuitive, but you want to be adding all of these layers over the top of your elements. So everything has a double. The sky has a double, the grass has a double, texture of the wall has a double, bricks have a double, vegetation, people, shadow, everything has a double over the top. And that's really how we create the effect that we have here, because it takes something that looks quite real, like this tree, and turns it into an artist's abstraction of that. And it's the abstraction that gives us the essence, it gives us the emotive quality. So, to summarize the techniques that we've used today, there's only one real addition from last week, because we already had our selection tools, and we're already using paint, brush, and the bucket tool. So all we've really done is learn how to bring in textures, to use the right-click distort warp tool after using Command T, and we've looked at using the hue tool as well. And that's really it. We're layering in color, we're layering in texture, but after we slowly add all these things together, we come out with an image that is quite evocative and quite beautiful. So let's look at how such a simple change as the sky color can dramatically affect the overall image. So if I come down to here and I turn my pink sky off to the blue sky, all of a sudden what felt like a daytime image now could be interpreted as a nighttime with a full moon, just because of the difference in the color of the sky, right? And we have our pink sky there as well. It really does make it feel like a very different light condition. I know it's just a trick of the eye, but we can very much see how using the hue tool can manipulate the overall image. So again, we've got Command T. If I bring up my sky here, Command T, right click, and all of these tools that we had here, flip horizontal, flip vertical, distort and warp, and Command U, our hue and our saturation that we can play with as well. We can make things darker, we can play with the saturation, bump that right the way up to a red sky. We can play with where that sits relative to the hue. We can do a lot of different things and have a lot of different experience just based on this one tool. And you do that with every single layer. If we took this grass here and started to play with these colors, we can have more of a vibrant green grass, an olivey grass, a brown grass. It seems simple, but these things do add up to create complexity and, more importantly, atmosphere in the image. So I want you to play as much as you can. Add in as many layers as you can to your different perspectives and create an experience. Don't worry so much about what the original building looked like. Instead, tell us what it's like to be there, what it's like to experience that space. So if I go back to my building, there's this one here. This is the Studio Bright Rockers Hill house. It looks different here to here, but this image gives us a sensation. It tells us what it might be like to be in that space. And that's what I want for you. So have fun. Enjoy experimenting with lots of different layers. Remember, never leave one textural layer by itself. Always have a double, which helps you mute the colors and play with the colors. But have fun. Enjoy this experience and create a wonderful atmosphere. Bye for now.